Hey, I don't think it's your month, is it? No, he's filling in, so it's okay. It's okay. He's filling in. And the announcement is, of course, everybody already knows, time change Saturday night. So don't be late. It is the late one, right? Yeah. Don't be late. All right. Yeah, you'll be here? Good. There's only been one time that I've ever been late. Nope. I wasn't even late. I got here at 9 o'clock. I've never been late to Bible class or to worship service, but that was the closest I've ever come. I got here at 9 o'clock because I didn't realize time change had taken place. Standing here and I don't have my stuff. All right. Let's open our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And I'd like to get a volunteer to read verse 13. So, if you'd like to read for us, you could raise your hand. I'll call on you. Hebrews 11 and verse 13. All right, Gerald?
These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth.
Okay, so let's break it down so that we get the context of this particular verse. These all died in faith. Who are these? Well, in order to figure that out, we go back, right? And we go back all the way to verse 1 in this particular context. And this chapter is dealing with faith and what faith is. It is something that we can see evidence for. Right? There's evidence to back up our faith. Otherwise, it's not really faith, is it? It's just some figment of our imagination. But faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. He starts there with Abel, talking about how Abel offered this sacrifice, but then go and was acceptable to God. Cain did not. Then we see Enoch, and we keep on going through. We see Noah and Abraham and Sarah. We get on down to Moses, and then, of course, the children of Israel. The walls of Jericho falling down. Then in verse 32, many more listed, such as Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and the list goes on. And I believe the these is going to refer to those previous of verse 13, but could also be said about those that would follow. So what does he say? He says, these all died in faith. All right? If they did all of those things by faith, we know the Bible teaches us faith comes by hearing the Word of God. So their evidence is that God said this and God fulfills His promises, right? So now they died in that. What was the promises that God gave them? Well, we could take, for example, Abraham. God tells Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis that all nations of the earth are going to be blessed through him. Now, did Abraham get to see that? No, but he died in faith knowing that promise would be fulfilled. It says there in Hebrews 11:13, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. What is the Hebrews writer referring to there? By calling these individuals exiles on the earth, strangers. Right. Let's sing that song at the end of the class today, all right? Somebody remind me of that. This world is not my home. I don't know about you, but a lot of times that song just kind of pops in my head. You know when it pops in my head? when crazy stuff's happening. Whenever I'm watching the news, I'm listening to the radio, awful things happen, I just remind myself, this world is not my home. Because I can get so caught up in the politics of today. I can get so caught up in the circumstances around me that I can become distracted from the fact that this world's not my home. I keep going back to Psalm 23. You know, David begins with God makes him to lie down in green pastures, right? He leads him beside still waters. You know what somebody I was reading recently commented on regarding Psalm 23, and I had really never noticed it. It says, he makes me to lay down in green pastures. Makes me, right? You know, and if you think about sheep, you know, being called a sheep is not exactly a compliment, is it? Because sheep need to be led. Sheep need to be told, hey, this is where you need to lay down. This is where you need to eat. This is where you need to drink, and need to be brought to those places. And we do, and God does that for us, provides those things. But what really stands out for me, and I've told you this before, is the very last verse in that psalm, and that is where David would say that he would dwell in the house of the Lord, right? What was the last word? Forever, right? Forever. And it just brings all priorities into focus, doesn't it? The word forever, because if you think about that word, I don't know that there's too many more important words than the word forever, because this isn't forever, but heaven is, right? And so now we're trying to get that concept, that idea of sojourners or exiles or strangers in this world, on this earth. And we ask ourselves, as we look at some of those individuals, particularly people like Noah and Abraham, and the way they're described, what the Bible tells us about them, and sometimes we're thinking, how in the world did they ever accomplish those things? And this verse tells us how. They were looking for the city far off. They were recognizing that this wasn't their home. And so sometimes we struggle with the here and now, and I think this is a great concept for us to consider. Let's turn in our Bibles over to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, and let me ask you, because I know that in my brief lifetime, the world has changed dramatically. I mean, it's upside down compared to whenever I was in high school, right? Things are completely different. And so for you, do you see that as well? I mean, yeah, well, and that's a good point. Is it just because as we're getting older, we're seeing it differently? It's probably a little bit of both, but I think it's more that the world is changing. I am seeing it differently for sure. I'm maturing, and I'm getting to where I do see things from a different perspective. But absolutely, things are changing. Chris. It's continuing to rotate, and it's continuing to go in the same direction it always does. We're always seeing that moral decline. Now there may be some uprises, and I think we can always go back and say and comfort ourselves with Genesis chapter 6 and say, well, at least every thought of all people on the earth isn't evil continually. We're not there yet, so we're doing okay. But there is this decline, and we see it in our country, where, not that long ago, the people of our country looked at morality through a completely different lens. Now, I'll go ahead and say also that there are some things that are a lot better than they were 50 years ago in respect to even to morality, but for the most part, things have gone downhill. Shane?
I think it's a combination of both. The world is changing some, but we see more
right? The difference between us and the world is becoming greater. Let me ask you this. You know, let's say, think back, if you can, to 20 years ago in your prayers 20 years ago. And I'm thinking back for myself, not even 20, maybe 15, 10 years ago, praying for missionaries in foreign countries because they're being persecuted, right? They're suffering persecution and not really being able to relate much because of the laws in our country that protected us from those things. But the more time goes on, the more it feels like we can relate a little bit more, right? Because things are changing. I read a quote. I wanted to share it with you. It's by Tim Keller. He wrote, "We are entering a new era in which there is not only no social benefit to being Christian, but an actual social cost. In many places, culture is becoming increasingly hostile toward faith, and beliefs in God, truth, sin, and afterlife are disappearing in more and more people. Now, culture is producing people for whom Christianity is not only offensive, but incomprehensible." 1 Peter 2:11. 1 Peter 2:11. "Beloved, I urge you, as sojourners and exiles, to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul." Abstain from the passions of the flesh which war against your soul. We're going to be talking about 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, maybe a little bit further down tonight as we introduce our topic of study. I'm not going to tell you what the topic of study is until the end of the class. You may figure it out by then. But I want us to think about how how to, show our faith, stay in our faith, grow in our faith in an ever increasingly hostile world, a world that's becoming more and more hostile toward our God.
James, we have a tendency to want to say world, but it's people. The world is exactly the way God made it.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't changed. The sun still comes up in the east and sets in the west, 7 days in a week. But people have changed, and they're changing constantly, and not for the better, but for the worse.
That's right. We see people, and maybe calling it the world is being too general, being too abstract, and not making it personal enough to point out this is humanity. And we can go back all the way to Genesis, and we see the morality of humanity doing this, right? Especially visible in the book of Judges, but we see this throughout history, and we're going down the hill right now. It feels like, right? And I want us to look at this concept of sojourners, exiles, pilgrims tonight, as we prepare to look at some examples from the Bible regarding what it means to be a pilgrim and how we can accomplish this. Psalm 100. Let's mark our Bibles here in 1 Peter chapter 2 and go on over to Psalm 118. Psalm 118, verses 13 and 14. Really, this may kind of help us express how we feel about this. Psalm 118, verses 13 and 14. All right, can I get a volunteer? Brian, you got that? Thank you.
hard, so that I was falling, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength, my song. He has become my salvation.
All right, I was pushed hard. That's the way the psalmist describes it. Pushed hard. And sometimes when we're pushed hard, we fall down. And it does feel like secularism and modern paganism are having this sort of toll on us in our world today. Had a couple of other comments and notes I'd written here I wanted to share with you. For a while there, in the course of the history of our country, at least, as Christians, well, describe for me the Lord's church in the 50s and the 60s, even going on into the 70s, if you lived in that time. It was growing?
In the 50s, 60s, and even up into the 70s.
Okay.
In the 50s, it was the fastest growing religion in the world. Not so today.
Right?
But it was also segregated.
Yeah. Well, so we did see.
It wasn't all good.
Right. We did see some, like I said, commented on earlier, some morality issues early on in our country. But we saw with the protections and the laws of our country for religious liberties, freedoms, we also found comfort. And what comes with comfort? That's the exact word I was thinking of. Complacency. And when we get complacent, we get lazy, and things. And then where does our treasure become? Instead of in heaven, it's right there before our eyes, right? Addicted to me. I think Marshall Keeble preached that one. Addicted to mediocrity. Yeah. So let's go back to our text, 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2.
In the 50s and 60s and early 70s, the church was the fastest growing religious organization in the nation.
Yeah, it certainly was. Here was this. Okay. Why the call? Why the call? Here in our text, we see the first word that is mentioned here or the first concept, maybe not the first word in your translation, but the word in mine is beloved. And this is what we're asking ourselves here is why in this text does Peter reach out to these individuals and say, this is what you need to do? Because he said, you see, the next part of this is in verse 11 is, beloved, I urge you. And your translation might say, I beg you. All right, so we're asking the question at this point, why the call? Why is he begging them? Well, there's the reason behind it all is, well, maybe they're not doing what they should be doing. But even if somebody's not doing what they should be doing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to reach out to them. And I think what we see here with this word is beloved is what? Love, care. Why is he referring to them this way? Why does he care about them? Well, Peter here, of course, is the writer of this letter, but it's also inspired by God. So we do know here that this is the way that God also feels about them. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, Peter would again refer to them as beloved. Do not be surprised by the fiery trial that comes upon you. But he refers to them that way. Paul and James and John and Jude, they all use this term. It's a term of endearment to refer to them. But most of all, we're loved by God, the Father and the Son. Romans chapter 1, verse 7, there Paul writes, to all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints. Now, think about this, because this plea, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles, this plea isn't, it's in the direct context, it is for those to whom Peter is writing. But we're in a similar situation today, and that we are still sojourners. We're still exiles in this country. And more we're feeling that, not feeling like the majority anymore. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? It can even make us angry about the situation. Here, Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, he would say, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. And then he would go and say what they should do. But these were God's chosen people. And we fit that same bill. It is out of this human and divine love that Peter's going to write this, reach out to them, make this plea. The next phrasing that he uses here is sojourners and pilgrims. And for the sake of any who might not quite understand this concept, what are we talking about? Yes, sir.
About people that are living in a place that's not their own,
That's right.
but foreigners.
Okay. Foreigners, people living in a place that's not their own. And, it's, if you've ever had to go overseas for work maybe, or even on a mission trip for an extended period of time, you might get a taste of that, but it's always, you come home and what's the first thing we say when we get home? Oh, I'm so glad to be home and sleeping in my own bed, and we're talking about the comforts, right, of being back home, and sometimes we're just too comfortable. David, you had a comment?
I was just going to mention the NAS version uses the term aliens.
Aliens, that's it. Foreigners, and you know what stands out about? We have a quote foreigner coming to visit with us in 1 month. Peter Chin from Singapore, what is the name of that school? Far East World
Evangelism.
Thank you. But that's the ministry. That's what that's not what they call the school though. It's Four Seas Bible College. Whew. I knew it was there. It's yeah, you do. It's on the back of the bulletin. Okay.
Not what you just said.
Okay. Four Seas Bible College isn't on there?
Four Seas Singapore.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, doesn't matter who's right. I'm right. I'm just kidding. He's coming. He's coming. And what you'll notice when you have someone come from another country who does not spend much time here, what are you going to notice about them? They're different. They won't eat the same things. As a matter of fact, Brother B.J. Clark was here just last week, right? And he's from Tennessee. I asked him one night, how was dinner? He said, spicy. I said, nobody else that ate with him said that. Why? Because that's what we're used to eating, and it's a little different. I had a missionary come and stay at my house one time. He was from Ghana, and it was the middle of the summer, and I kept my thermostat in my house on 74, 73, something like that. The man liked to froze to death in my house because it was 74 degrees, and he's used to sleeping in 85 degrees at night. When I left Ghana, at 9 o'clock at night, it was 90 degrees, all right? So it was hot there. He comes here, and it's very odd. He doesn't fit in. That's the point. Not fitting in to the world. Jerry?
I just wanted to say that whenever one of these conversations come up, I always use my tablet and look at the original word and look at what Strong says. But there always gives you a bunch of possibilities that you can pick according to the context. And one of the choices is in the New Testament, metaphorically, in reference to heaven as the native country, one who sojourns on earth.
Right. Spiritually speaking, that's what we're talking about. We're sojourning on earth.
The right application for what we're discussing.
Absolutely. And in view of his love for the brethren, calling them beloved, he reminds them this world is not your home, while begging them, pleading with them to be the light. Yeah. Be the light. And to pay close attention, because there's some things going on, right? There's some things that we're going to be and are facing on a daily basis here. He says to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. And I think we absolutely, the second point comes in here as well. We'll get to it in a minute. But why? Why be concerned about that? Why be concerned about this war? All right, if you're not prepared, it can take you down in view of what? Eternity, in view of heaven, in view of priorities here. We're talking about the soul, which is why he would say, abstain from the passions of the flesh. We're talking about sin and how it's warring against what?
Soul.
The soul, right? Warring against the soul. Now, the next point here that he'll make after talking about this is that another reason why we need to do this. It's not solely about you. What is it about? An example. An example to others. Others are watching. Others see. Some of these individuals are going to be speaking evil of us. And if we're not living I don't mean to speak ill. I don't know if I should use this example or not. Okay, I'm going to do it anyway. Driving down the road, right, going home, and a police officer pulls onto the road in front of me. He's driving along. He makes a left-hand turn, no blinker. Driving along, I turn on my blinker. I'm a stickler for blinkers, right? Turn on my blinker, turn left. I'm going down the road. I'm driving the speed limit, and he's leaving me. All right, no lights on. No, it's not an emergency. He's just driving well above the speed limit, right? We get to the next turn. He makes a right-hand turn, no signal. Speeds off down the highway. I'm like, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. People witness that. People are watching us, especially us, as we claim to be Christians, right? They're waiting for us to make mistakes. Do you have family members who wait to see? Oh, and then if they see something, they're going to point it out. Luke? Oh, go.
It's easier to be the person that should be when people are watching you. The person should be when they're not watching.
What does he say here? at the end of the verse, he says, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Two things I want to talk about there. And it really, it goes back to, well, what are most people living for? From day to day.
I guess, just for pleasure and gusto and
Stuff,
material.
pleasure, be happy, right? Whatever's going, we see it all the time. Whatever's going to make you happy, you know. Pursuit of happiness. Well, and oh yeah, yes, you only live once, right? So that's just another way of saying what? Eat, drink, and be merry, right? Make the most of. But what is Peter saying? Our purpose in life is glorify God. Didn't Paul say the same thing? We're His workmanship, created for good works. He told that to the Ephesians. He told that to Titus. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Aiden, who did a fantastic job, his very first devotional. I'm so proud of him. I know you all are too. He did.
He also understands what 5 minutes is.
He does. He does. He does.
That would be a preacher.
Right? Oh, you guys. Glorify God. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, as we let our light shine, we're glorifying God. Okay, so the last part of that verse, he says, on the day of visitation. What's the day of visitation? All right, it could be one of two things as I see it. Either the day of visitation is the day of judgment, and that's probably the most obvious one, or it's the day in which they recognize that they need to obey the gospel, the day that they are presented with the gospel. That here's an opportunity for them to see that light, make that change.
You know what?
Yeah.
The original word there is episcopate,
Mm-hmm.
or for bishop.
Bishop,
So, it's,
for visitation.
yes. Yes, says, the act by which God looks into and searches out the ways, deeds, character of men in order to judge them, their lot accordingly, whether joyous or sad. And then there's some oversight suggestions about overseership, officer, charge of an elder,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
overseer or presiding officers in the Christian church.
It's interesting that the word can also be translated visitation or inspection or investigation.
Correct.
So in the day, and if we thought about it from the standpoint of investigation, for the day of investigation, a day in which they are considering evidence, maybe, what were they presented with from you? Anyway, that's that. Luke chapter 19, verse 44, Jesus would say, and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation, the time when this would happen. So whatever it is, it's a time when decisions are going to be made. All right, so
Reference verse I have for that same word is also speaking about some sort of judgment, whether it's the war, if the war God comes, or
you know what? Regardless of when that word or that phrase is referencing, it doesn't change what we're supposed to be doing, does it?
We need to be ready.
That's right. All right, the plea, right? That was the call. That was why he loves them This isn't their home. They need to be ready for this war, and they need to be examples to others because others are watching. Okay, so here's what's the plea? The plea is to abstain from fleshly lusts. Paul would talk about these fleshly lusts in that list that he would give to the Galatians in Galatians chapter 5, verse 19. The works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like this. I like that phrase, and things like this. So, the argument then that comes into play here of that some people would use is, well, it's not, the Bible doesn't say I can't do it. Well, that verse does. Things like this, sinful things like this. All right. As I warned you before, that those who do these things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So his first plea here, his begging is that they abstain from these things because, well, these things will destroy us from the inside out. All right, I'm watching the clock here. In Romans chapter 8, verses 5 and 6, Paul would write there, Romans 8, 5 and 6, he says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, and those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace." So in a time, and I want to keep coming back to our current context, our reality, the time in which we live, because we want to make each point to be relevant. What are we doing to prepare ourselves? Paul would encourage the brethren in Romans chapter 6 to put on the whole armor of God, right? To prepare themselves for these things. He would say in Romans 13, verse 13 and 14, "Let us walk properly as in the daytime, and not according to all of those sins of the flesh." All right? So abstain from those things, and then walk in honorable conduct. The plea here, the urgency is to have this honorable conduct, harmonious with God's word. All right. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. So, let's turn over to the book of Daniel. What do we know about the Tower of Babel?
Not a whole lot.
What do we know about it?
Yeah.
We're trying to build it to go up to heaven. We're trying to use their own power to get there.
All right. They're trying to build a tower to heaven.
And whatever their attitude was, God didn't like it.
Right. And they were, the Bible tells us they were working together on this to accomplish this. Whatever it was, we're not giving exact details as to what's taking place, but whatever it is, like Jerry said, God didn't like it. And so there's dispersion there. Babylon is a nation in this area. Babylon is a nation that at the time of Daniel is led by a king. His name is Nebuchadnezzar, we find that it is the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah. And I can't help but think back to the major characters, and I hate using the word characters because it makes it sound like a story and a made-up story, but it's not, right? We're talking about actual individuals. Who do we see in the book of Daniel? We see Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel. All right, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I'm sure that's the names that they would want us to use, right? Right, you're right. We remember their Babylonian or their Chaldean names.
We should remember them like you should.
Yeah.
We haven't done it yet.
Belteshazzar. Yeah, that's the name that Daniel is, right. Yeah.
That's the name they gave you.
Yeah. Who else? So that's 4 young men and a king. The angel. The lions. Some guards. The major individuals are going to be Cyrus and Darius, the other 2 leaders involved in here. And there'll be others, but okay, so of these, well, as we're looking at the book, who's the hero here? God's the hero. We have a tendency when we look at books like this, though, to really focus on, and I've preached sermons on it. Dare to be who? A Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. And there's nothing wrong with imitating faithful people of God. But that's not what this book is about. This book isn't about God trying to tell us to be like Daniel. It isn't about God trying to tell us to be like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah whenever they're thrown into the fiery furnace, and that was their choice. God's not telling us to be like them. It is about believing in the God that they believed in. That's what we're talking about, believing in the same God that brought them through these difficult times. Secularism in our time is pushing back. And I can't help but remember Daniel and these other 3 and what they must have been facing. Because where are they prior to what's happened? Before Nebuchadnezzar and his armies come in. I mean, and then think about it, okay? This is Jerusalem. Well, that's where they're at. I told you the answer. But this is Jerusalem, and what, from a man's standpoint, compare the armies of Israel to, or the armies of Judah to the armies of Nebuchadnezzar? You can't. There's not anything to compare. Nebuchadnezzar rules the world. There is a long list of nations that Nebuchadnezzar conquered before he ever got to Jerusalem. And I find it interesting that the book of Daniel starts out, and there in verse 1 it says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. All right? So he came, besieged it, and it's his. The Bible tells us that God gave it over to him, but this is a huge army, this is a huge nation. Now, where's Daniel? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You know, what was their lives like pre-Nebuchadnezzar, pre-Babylon? They're around, who are they around? They're around the princes of Judah. They were apparently very well-educated young men, because that's who Nebuchadnezzar would say to choose out. But, I mean, who'd they spend their time with? They spent their time, their days, with people of like mind. people who agreed with them about the God of heaven, who shared the same faith. And while, the nation isn't exactly in the right spot spiritually, I believe that Daniel and these three and some others around them must have been. And then they're taken from that and they're placed into exile. They are sojourners. They are exiles in a hostile environment. Nothing is like it was before. There's no comfort. It must have been scary. I can't help but wonder, the Bible tells us about these 4 young men. How many do you think there were? The Bible doesn't tell us, but I find it interesting that these are the 4. And it makes me wonder, well, where are the rest? Where are the rest? In our current culture, and you can study Daniel, because that's where we're going to be the next, year. No, I'm just kidding. We're only going to cover the first 7 chapters because the last through 12 really deal with Revelation and much of the apocalyptic language from there. And also we did study Daniel about 7 years ago, maybe not that long ago, but it's fitting in and I wanted to study it. But we'll study these first 7 chapters. I lost my train of thought. Christianity is really beginning to appear in our culture as superstitious bigotry, right? I mean, look at the way that humanists in our country look at Christianity. Jerry?
I was going to tell you 2 minutes ago that you wanted to sing that song.
Oh!
You only had 2 minutes. Now you don't have anything.
That's what you think. Won't take long. Who has our closing prayer?
Blake.
Oh, you already got it for me, Blake? Thanks. You have the closing prayer? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Just stay right up here then. All right, 496. We're just going to sing first and last stanzas. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Drift back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. It will be a verse-by-verse study, so if you want to read through, that's fantastic. Read through chapter 1, and we'll be on that at least next week. Blake?
That we just went through, and we ask you to please help us to learn from Daniel and his life and the example he set for us, and also the example that his friends set. And we ask that you'd please be with us and help us to remember that this world isn't our home, and that one day we will have a home in heaven with you if we live as we should and do as you've told us. And we ask that you'd help us to go out and teach others and share the news with them. And we thank you for everything you give us, and ask us to have safe travels as we leave here. In your son's name we pray. Amen.